My daughter-in-law called me useless old woman at dinner. The next day, she lost her job because I owned the company. For years, I accepted being treated as if my voice had lost its value. I sat at my own family's table like I didn't exist, ignored, disbelieved, even humiliated, all for the sake of peace. Deep down, they thought I was just a frail, retired old lady, incapable of understanding the modern world. Little did they know that behind my silence, a leader still existed. A woman who built an empire with her own hands. My story is about awakening, about rediscovering my strength at the most improbable moment, and proving that dignity, respect, and wisdom have no expiration date. I'm so happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far it has reached. There's something cutting about the way silence settles into the crevices of a full house. I always sat in the same armchair near the window with a shawl folded over my shoulders, like an ancient presence no one noticed anymore. Laughter came from the kitchen, footsteps went back and forth in the hallway, but none of them sought me out. Everything there was familiar to me. The curtains I had sewn myself, the clock inherited from my mother, the frames with faded photos. Still, I felt as if my existence was just a shadow, an uncomfortable reminder of passing time. Dennis rushed past me, Kelly barely glanced my way. The grandchildren were always too busy with screens to listen to my stories. And I, who was once the center of the house, was now just a corner. I observed the details of daily life with eyes that saw beyond, the forgotten dirty plate, the sharp tone in responses, the way my presence was naturally ignored. No one asked how I was. No one remembered the woman who built that family with her own hands. My body was still strong, my mind even more so. But the way they spoke to me, or worse how they avoided speaking, made me doubt my worth. I smiled in silence, hiding the pain of someone who learned to keep quiet to maintain peace. Silence became a companion, but it wasn't welcome. It was a cruel reminder that I, Ava Morgan, was slowly being erased. Even when I tried to start a conversation, I was interrupted by trivial matters or traded for a cell phone screen. I didn't blame my children, at least not entirely. The modern world doesn't teach us to value the past. But it hurt to see everything I built treated as a backdrop for lives that seemed to run without me. The home became a stage and I, an extra. Even among my own, I felt invisible. They spoke of me as if I weren't there, as if my silence was consent for their indifference. They commented on my health, my age, about how it was better for her to stay quiet so she wouldn't get tired. I heard everything. Every word, every intonation laden with pity or impatience. They didn't mean to hurt me, perhaps, but they hurt me anyway. Once I heard Kelly saying that I should be happy not to worry about anything anymore. As if not thinking was a blessing. As if the brain with age was just dead weight. Dennis merely nodded, neither defending nor opposing. That pierced me more than if they had yelled at me. Indifference hurts more than direct confrontation. Other times they suggested I was too old to understand certain conversations. As if my mind, sharp and trained by decades of negotiations, had been buried with my husband. They didn't know, of course, that I still read reports at night. That I observed, calculated, understood everything. I just chose silence as a shield for now. Sophia, my daughter, no longer lived with us, and her absence was a void I felt on long mornings. She understood me more than the others, but distance separated us. Perhaps for protection, perhaps due to unresolved grievances. And there, alone, listening to others decide what was best for me, I realized something essential. I was still alive, but they treated me like an old portrait. Words cut deeper than any absence. Sometimes at dusk I allowed myself to remember. I closed my eyes and saw his face, my husband's, with that serene smile that never judged me. He was the only one who saw me whole, even on days when I felt fragmented myself. His absence was like an echo that filled every corner of the house, every silence that now weighed more heavily. I missed our silent coffees, where a glance was enough for us to understand each other. It had been so many years by his side building dreams, facing challenges. He always said that my strength lay precisely in the calm with which I faced chaos. Sometimes I wonder if he would see this house the same way now, so full of noise and at the same time so empty. Memories came in waves. Our first office, the meeting where we closed our biggest contract, the night we decided it was time to stop and observe. He knew I needed time. That this pause was strategy, not surrender. And perhaps that's why, even in moments when I doubted myself, it was his voice I heard in my thoughts. As if he were still here, waiting for me to remember who I really am. The longing was a reminder of the love we had, but also of the woman he saw, and that I had hidden to fit into the space they left for me. But little by little, in the silence they imposed on me, a spark grew. Something I didn't even know still existed. A memory. Promise. He always said, one day you will remember who you are. It was a night like so many others, with the table set and places marked more by habit than by affection. Conversations were empty, punctuated by forced laughter and glances that avoided meeting. The smell of food mingled with the tension in the air. A tension only I seemed to notice. I always sat in the same corner, near the head of the table that once belonged to my husband. Now I was just a shadow beside it. Kelly spoke loudly like someone who needs to dominate the environment. Dennis agreed with everything, avoiding any conflict as he always did. The grandchildren were distracted with their phones, absent even though they were there. Sophia was not present, which made everything even more barren. I merely observed with calm eyes, but inside, I felt the ice that trickled through every word. The jokes came subtle and laced with venom. Phrases like, "Some people here don't even need to worry about work anymore," were tossed into the air, always followed by fake smiles. I pretended not to hear, but my chest tightened with each insinuation. Kelly dominated the table with her sarcasm disguised as charm, and no one challenged her. With each passing minute, the feeling that something was about to happen grew. It was as if a heavy cloud hung over all of us, about to burst. And I knew, that night something would change. I just didn't know how much yet. My silence was the only defense left on that battlefield disguised as dinner. The atmosphere was thick, like before a storm. It all happened fast, but every word was etched in me as if carved in stone. Kelly, with a wine glass in her hand, turned to me and said, "Don't you think it's about time you stopped taking up space? Useless old woman." Silence. A cruel silence that echoed louder than any scream. I felt my heart beat once strong, then again it hurt. No one said a word. Dennis lowered his eyes. The grandchildren continued as if nothing had happened. The table grew tense, but no one moved. I stared at Kelly for a second, with a look she probably interpreted as fear. But it was something different. It was remembrance. Remembrance of everything I had faced in life to get there. And she, young arrogant, had no idea who she was talking to. She laughed. Laughed as if she had won some invisible dispute. "Sorry, it was a joke," she said. But it wasn't. It was a precise, rehearsed, expected blow. A blow she knew no one there would care to prevent. And at that moment it wasn't pain that overwhelmed me. It was lucidity. The clarity that I had allowed this for too long. I swallowed hard. Took a deep breath. Continued sitting as if nothing had happened. But inside something had been triggered. Something old, powerful. A flame that, even dormant, never went out. She had no idea what she had awakened in me. No one reacted. Not even Dennis. I stayed until the end of dinner, smiling on the outside as I always did. I spoke little, ate even less. I retired to my room without haste, each step a choice, each silence an answer. When I closed the door behind me, I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not anymore. Crying would be accepting. And I no longer accepted. I sat at the desk where I used to write letters to my husband. There were still papers and pens there, like memories of a time when my word had value. I picked up a sheet and began to write, but not a letter. It was a plan. Short, objective, like a war sketch. A silent movement that would begin that very night. I picked up my phone, typed a name I hadn't used in months. Amber. The woman I had temporarily left in charge of my company, who knew how to wait, observe, and act. I sent a short message. "I want to talk tomorrow morning. Confidential." And then I closed my phone and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me still had something to say to the world. I had been silent for too long. I had accepted too much. But now it was different. That phrase, that dinner, that humiliation. They had sealed a new beginning. And it would start without warning. Tomorrow, she will understand who she's dealing with. The next morning, I put on my navy blue coat, the same one I wore to the most important meetings, and went to meet Amber. I chose a discreet cafe in the city center, away from the watchful eyes of family and employees. Amber arrived punctually as always, her sharp gaze hidden behind elegant discretion. As soon as she sat down, I was direct. "I want Kelly out of the company." She wasn't surprised. She just crossed her arms and waited for me to continue. I explained what had happened the night before, but without dramatization. Just facts. Like a CEO exposing an executive's failures. Kelly had crossed all lines, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as an employee. And not out of personal pride, but because if she was capable of disrespecting an older woman like that, what else could she be doing in the company? Amber listened intently, without interrupting. "It's all documented," she said after a few seconds, "including things you don't even know yet. I was just waiting for your authorization." That assured me I wasn't alone. Amber had been more than an interim manager. She had protected me. She had silently and with rare loyalty paved the way for my return. I didn't smile, but inside I felt the same firmness I had on my best days. "Then activate the process. And don't say yet that it came from me. This is just the beginning." Amber nodded without questioning. Amber just smiled. I was waiting for this. I left the cafe with a lighter heart, but my mind alert. I asked the driver to drop me off 2 blocks before the company building. I wanted to walk alone, observe, feel the atmosphere. It had been months since I had set foot there, and my face was absent from the memory of the newer employees. An elderly woman entering the building didn't attract attention, and that was exactly what I wanted. I walked through the reception as if visiting someone, but no one asked my name. My old badge still worked. I had never stopped being the owner. I went up the floors slowly, recognizing faces, overhearing comments. Some spoke ill of the management, others ignored the problems. But one detail caught my attention, the gaze of a young man. He saw me, hesitated for a second, and smiled as if he were in front of someone important. It was the intern. I remembered his name from the last report, Tyler. He didn't know who I was, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of respect. "Can I help you?" he asked gently. I replied with another question. "Do you like working here?" He smiled and answered, "I'm still learning, but I like it when I see that there are people who care." Little did he know that those people included me. And at that moment I understood. The time of silence was over. Now it was time to act and to be seen again. The intern's eyes lit up at the sight of the mysterious lady. That afternoon I called Jerry, my old friend and trusted lawyer. He answered with that calm voice of someone who always knew how to read between the lines. "Has the time come?" he asked without me needing to explain. We met in his office, among piles of legal books and memories of past victories. Seeing him, I felt a part of myself reconnect with the strong woman who had fallen asleep. I explained the recent events, my visit to the company, Kelly's attitude. He listened seriously and at the end, opened an already prepared folder. "I knew you would come back. I've prepared everything." There was a transition plan, documents for the board, strategies to discreetly and forcefully resume the presidency. Jerry didn't wait for orders, he anticipated them. We signed the first documents together. It was like starting the engine of a ship that had been anchored for too long. The breeze of justice was beginning to blow in my favor, and I didn't need to justify myself to anyone. Just act. With serenity, intelligence, and the name that had always been mine. Before leaving, Jerry told me, "You were never fragile. You were just resting." I left there determined, certain that I would not back down. It was the beginning of a new cycle. A cycle in which I would once again be who I truly am. "So it's decided, we're taking her out of office." Dennis always had a sweet look, but it had lost its sparkle over the years. When I watched him now, so submissive, so disconnected from himself, my heart broke in silence. I remembered the boy who ran to show me his drawings, the times he said he wanted to be like his father. Where was that boy? Where was the man who promised to protect his own family? Today's Dennis seemed more like a spectator of his own life. I saw him sitting on the porch, engrossed in his phone, as if escaping reality was easier than facing it. I tried to start a conversation, but he replied with short phrases, avoiding my gaze. There was guilt in his silence, but also a cowardly fear. He never wanted conflict, never did. And because of that, he became complicit in the disrespect I suffered. It was easier for him to follow Kelly's rhythm, to let her set the tone. Perhaps he thought he was protecting me by avoiding confrontations, without realizing that his omission was more painful than any cruel word. The roots of our connection were still there, but covered by layers of indifference and convenience. It hurt to realize how he had drifted away from the man his father and I had raised. Seeing my son shrink before his wife was one of the most silent pains of my life. Not because of the submission itself, but because I knew he had a choice and he chose not to defend me. And then for the first time in years I sadly asked myself, where is the man I raised? The answer came days later, like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. Amber told me that Dennis, by chance, discovered some old documents that Kelly had manipulated. She altered dates, forged information, and used all of this as justification to distance me from the company and from family life, all under the false narrative of taking care of me. But in truth, she just wanted to isolate me. Dennis was in shock. According to Amber, he spent hours reviewing the papers, trying to understand how he hadn't noticed before. The betrayal wasn't just against me, it was against him too. His wife lied, manipulated, acted behind his back. The image he had of his own marriage began to crumble. Amber made it clear that he deserved to know the truth, but that the rest was up to me. It was my decision to forgive him or not. I listened in silence. I didn't cry, I didn't explode. I just let the information settle in me like something I had suspected, but avoided facing. The pieces were falling into place and now there was no turning back. Dennis was used as a shield by Kelly, and deep down he knew it. But now there was no denying it. The truth hit him like a cold shower. At the end of that week, Dennis sought me out. He knocked on my bedroom door with red eyes and a choked voice. "Mom, I need to talk to you." I sat up, but didn't invite him in. He remained standing, holding some papers in his hands, probably the same ones Kelly had tried to hide. There was pain in his eyes, but also shame. He started to speak, but I interrupted with a calm gesture. "I know. I just said that." He tried to justify, to say he didn't realize that he trusted her. But words like that don't change what was done. Blind trust is a choice. Omission is a decision. He failed me and now he had to deal with it. It wasn't time for reconciliation, it was time for responsibility. "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he said. I took a deep breath. I didn't want to lose my son either. But at that moment my priority was to rescue myself. The woman who had been silent for too long needed justice before offering forgiveness. Reconciliation would come, but in due time and with actions, not excuses. "Dennis, what has been broken is not repaired with words. It is repaired with attitude." And then I closed the door firmly, but without resentment. Because now, justice came before reconciliation. Now is not the time for forgiveness, it's time for justice. I returned to the company without fanfare, with a folder in my hands and my eyes attentive to every detail. Amber had separated reports from the last 2 years, especially those signed by Kelly. I read everything calmly and precisely as in the old days. Every number, every decision, every unnecessary expense. Everything revealed careless, vain, and irresponsible management. She used the company as a showcase, not as a mission. There were partnerships made on impulse, poorly explained cuts, promotions granted without criteria. But what hurt me most was seeing important projects abandoned, promising ideas shelved. Kelly used the company as a stage to display power, not to build. And what I took a lifetime to build, she almost dismantled in a few years. I spent hours analyzing, marking errors, highlighting patterns. Amber helped me discreetly but let me lead. It was like rediscovering a forgotten part of myself. The strategist, the leader, the builder of the future. My empire was wounded but not dead. And I still knew exactly how to heal every crack. I closed the last report firmly. The decision was made. The house would return to order. Not out of pride, but out of respect for the legacy I left in the world. She almost destroyed what I built with a lifetime. The following week, Amber began preparations for the official announcement. The directors were notified of an extraordinary meeting. The communications team received a new visual identity. Everything subtle but firm. I would return, and I would return as I should. With dignity, clarity, and strength. Every detail was carefully orchestrated so that my image would emerge with unquestionable authority. Amber reviewed every slide, every phrase of the speech. She knew my story and therefore knew exactly how to position me. No blatant revenge. No direct attacks. Just presence. Just truth. That's what I needed, to be seen for who I really am. Not as the frail mother-in-law or the forgotten elderly woman, but as Ava Morgan. The news spread through the corridors like a whisper. No one confirmed, but everyone felt it. Something big was about to happen. And this time no one could stop it. There was no way to block the return of someone who never stopped being the owner. I sat in my old office for the first time in years. The smell was the same. The plaque with my name still there. I took a deep breath. I was home. Her name would shine again. On the morning of the announcement, I wore the white blazer I always wore for the most important decisions. The meeting hall was full, and the murmur ceased as soon as I entered. Surprised glances, some embarrassed, others relieved. I walked onto the stage with calm steps. Amber briefly introduced me, but my name alone was enough for silence to impose itself as reverence. I looked at every face present there and began. I know many thought I had given up. That age had defeated me. But time does not erase those who build with purpose. Today I return not just as president. I return as a woman who faced oblivion and chose to exist again. The reaction was restrained but intense. Some nodded, others lowered their heads. I announced the changes, the necessary cuts, the deserved promotions. All fairly, based on merit and a vision for the future. Kelly, of course, was not there. She had already been officially dismissed quietly. She didn't even have a chance to react. Because justice, when well done, does not shout. Simply fulfills itself. At the end, I looked up and stated firmly, looking directly at the board. And let it be clear, I am not old. I am experienced. And experienced people know exactly when it's time to return. And let it be clear, I am not old. I am experienced. Tyler began to approach subtly, as someone who respects the time of someone carrying stories. One day he left a coffee on my desk with a note. Thank you for everything you built. Still inspiring. That touched me more than he imagined. I didn't know how he had found out, but here was someone who saw me beyond age, beyond title. He started helping me discreetly with reports, cross-referencing data, updating information. He was quick, intelligent, and above all respectful. He never tried to impress me, just to serve with sincerity. His youth reminded me of who I used to be. Daring, attentive, driven by something greater than vanity. Tyler didn't see me as a relic, but as a reference. During one of the breaks he said, I think many here are afraid of your presence. I have admiration. I smiled. At that moment, I realized that there were still seeds planted waiting to bloom. The company needed renewal, yes, but it also needed to reclaim its essence. Tyler was part of this new generation that could learn from the previous one without erasing it. I made it clear that I trusted him, that I was watching him, and that when the time came, he would have more responsibilities. He nodded humbly, and a silent alliance was born. He saw in her what others ignored. Returning to my old position brought back names that time had not erased. I began to seek out old allies, loyal people who had helped build the company's foundation. Some were retired, others in smaller positions after Kelly's management. I found them one by one with coffee, conversation, and listening. And they all had something in common: they missed me. Many of them were discredited, with no room for ideas, relegated to the cold routine of impersonal decisions. When they saw me in action again, their eyes lit up. You're back, they would ask. And I would reply firmly, I'm back. And I need you. It was a silent reunion with the courage we had let slumber for too long. Every conversation was a delicate stitch in the torn fabric of trust. I heard memories, rediscoveries of forgotten projects, stories of ignored triumphs. In every detail, a seed of reconstruction. I realized that my return was not just personal. It was symbolic for many who felt erased. Together we planned changes. Small at first, but significant. It was time to restore values, rescue talents, and strengthen the company's soul. And the first to join me were precisely those who never doubted. We knew you'd come back. With renewed support, I began a silent reform, not in the furniture but in the people. I analyzed entire departments, reallocated forgotten talents, deactivated bloated sectors. Each change was strategic, designed not to please but to make sense. It was like cleaning old windows. Light came pouring back in with force. Amber and Tyler became key players in this process. She with her practical vision and ethics. He with his respectful enthusiasm and keen eye for detail. Together we designed new teams based on merit, not flattery. For the first time in years, people felt seen again, not for their positions but for their competence. The corridors came alive. Meetings became spaces for ideas, not egos. And I, sitting at the decision-making table again, saw my empire breathe as it once did. There were challenges, of course, but now they came with solutions and with people eager to make things happen. The most beautiful thing was realizing that all it took was for me to stand up, for others to rise as well. Not out of fear but out of inspiration. Because leadership is not control, it is presence. Now everything was starting to pick up pace again. Sophia arrived unannounced, with a small suitcase and a look laden with memories. The doorbell rang in the middle of the afternoon and, opening the door, I saw in her a mirror of what I once was. There was something broken in her eyes, but also a contained strength, as if she was ready for something new. "Mom, is there still room for me?" she asked, almost whispering. I stood there for a few seconds, absorbing that presence that had been distant for years. She entered, hesitant, like someone stepping onto territory she feared no longer belonged to her. I offered tea, silence, and a listening ear. And so we sat like two women who knew more than they said. The pain of the past hung in the air, but it didn't stop us from continuing. She began to speak without haste. She told me about the years of distance, the unresolved guilt, the hurt of feeling abandoned. I didn't interrupt her. I just listened with an open heart. Each word was a stone removed between us. Time doesn't heal everything, but it allows wounds to reveal themselves without rush. In the end, she cried. And so did I. But it wasn't sadness, it was liberation. The reunion that seemed impossible finally began to happen. "Mom, is there still room for me?" In the days that followed, we talked as we hadn't in a long time. We laughed, remembered, unearthed pains that no longer hurt as they once did. It was as if we were rebuilding a bridge brick by brick. And the foundation of that bridge was love, even disguised as silence for years. Sophia apologized, but I didn't want to hear apologies. I wanted truths. She told me she distanced herself because she felt my gaze at times pressured her too much. That she wanted to be herself and not an extension of me. I understood. And I said serenely that we are not born to mold our children, but to see them flourish. For the first time, she saw me not as a mother, but as a woman. We hugged. A long, lingering hug, one of those that say more than words. I smelled her hair as I used to when she was a girl. And she held my hand tightly, like someone deciding to stay. We were finally back to each other, not in the past but in the present. And so what seemed broken was mended with threads of maturity, forgiveness, and real affection. We were starting over. And this time side by side. The hug took decades to happen. Soon Sophia met Amber, Tyler, and the others. She observed with keen eyes the reconstruction I was leading and, little by little, became involved. Not out of obligation but out of affinity. She understood management, people's strategic vision. She had talent. And more than that, she had a passion for truth. The same one that drove me. We talked about Kelly. She knew everything and didn't hide her disgust. I never trusted her, she confessed. But I didn't think she'd go that far. We didn't need to plan anything. Simply existing with integrity was enough to expose those who live by lies. And together we became a firm wall against arrogance and falsehood. Sophia's presence by my side was a clear sign. My story wasn't ending alone. I had started a journey back, but now I had company. 2 generations of women united. Not just by blood ties but by purpose. And Kelly, realizing this, began to retreat, because united women do not retreat. We began to discuss plans, projects, dreams. Rebuilding the company was important, but rebuilding our connection was essential, and it was there stronger than ever. Now we are 2 women in the same cause. Kelly's downfall was not well digested by her. In the days following her dismissal, letters from lawyers, communiques, and veiled threats began to arrive. She alleged moral harassment, abuse of power, and even corporate manipulation. It was clear she wanted to reverse her departure, and if possible, tarnish my name in the process. Not for justice but for wounded vanity. She did not imagine, however, who she was dealing with. Every line of the documents she sent was carefully studied by Jerry, who had already anticipated this type of reaction. Kelly tried to twist the facts in her favor, distorting data, omissions, and dates. But we had proof. And more than that, we had the truth. A truth she underestimated. I remained calm. Silence was my best weapon. While she screamed for attention and control, I planned in silence with firm and calculated steps. Sophia followed every step, and Tyler alongside Amber organized files that supported our integrity. The time of Kelly's arrogance was coming to an end, and this time she would feel the weight of her own choices. At the meeting with Jerry, he looked at me with a half-smile and said, "If she wants war, she'll get war. And we'll win it like we win a game, with strategy. She wanted to fight? Then she'd have war." Jerry wasn't content with just refuting the attacks. He went further. He delved into the company's old records, into the internal audits that had been set aside during Kelly's management. And then he found it. Contracts with adulterated clauses, suspicious transactions, favors to suppliers with whom she had a personal relationship. It was a tangle of secrets she never thought anyone would discover. The dates matched decisions that had harmed entire departments. There was a millionaire project that was shelved because she diverted the funds to another priority, curiously linked to a shell company. Jerry printed every document, attached evidence, and prepared a robust dossier. It was more than an error. It was malice. I showed the papers to Sophia, who was speechless. "This isn't just unethical. It's criminal," she said. Amber agreed. We were facing something big, something that could definitively demoralize Kelly. And now it was no longer just a family dispute. It was a matter of corporate justice and public ethics. Jerry did what he always did best. He prepared the ground. And we, on our side, were ready. We wouldn't attack. We would just let the facts speak for themselves. This could destroy more than a career. The opportunity came at an internal press conference to present the company's new transparency and restructuring plans. All leaders were present, along with representatives from the legal and accounting departments. Amber began with a brief speech about the commitment to ethics. Then she handed the floor to Jerry. It was he who made the announcement no one expected. Without directly mentioning names, he laid out the facts, showed the documents, pointed out irregularities, and revealed the damage caused by questionable decisions. Kelly was in the audience, and her expression went from disbelief to panic. She tried to interrupt, but Jerry just raised his hand and continued calmly, each sentence more definitive than the last. When the slide showed the connections between the shell companies and the embezzlement of funds, a murmur filled the room. No one doubted anymore. The evidence was there, irrefutable. In the end, Jerry concluded by saying, "What is built with lies falls on its own. What is sustained by truth remains." No one dared to applaud. The silence spoke for everyone. Kelly left without a word. And there, in that instant, her mask fell before everyone. It was no longer just a matter of reputation, it was a public downfall. Now she was the one who no longer had a place. Amber organized the event with mastery. It was discreet, yet symbolic. A spacious hall, white flowers, carefully aligned chairs, soft light on the stage. Representatives from the board, old and new employees, press, and business partners were present. It wasn't just a celebration. It was a milestone. A moment to seal a new era, or rather a recovered era. Sophia accompanied me backstage, holding my hand tightly. Tyler adjusted the last details of the presentation, and Amber checked the timings like a conductor leading an orchestra. The atmosphere wasn't tense but expectant. We knew something grand was about to happen, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel fear. I wore an elegant, sober blue suit, with a brooch that belonged to my mother. It was my way of remembering all the women who came before me, and those who would come after. Jerry gave me a brief nod from the audience. Everything was ready. When my name was called, I slowly rose, took a deep breath, and walked onto the stage with steps that carried history. Restrained applause greeted me, but the silence that followed was stronger. It was respect. There was a different energy in the air. I looked at the audience and waited for everyone to settle. Then I began. For a long time I believed that silence was the best way to preserve what I had built. I thought that stepping aside was protecting, but I realized that by keeping quiet, I allowed others to speak for me. And today, I return not just to fill a position, but to reclaim my voice. I spoke about the value of experience, about how society often discards what it doesn't understand. I spoke about aging with dignity, about the right to remain relevant, and about the strength that exists in those who have fallen and chosen to rise again. Every sentence came from the depths of my soul, not to convince but to remind. I am not a woman who shouts, but those who listen carefully know that there are silent screams that change everything around them. Eyes shone, some moved to tears. Amber smiled. Tyler recorded everything, attentive to every word. Sophia cried openly, and I, firm, let my message echo through every corner of that place. I learned that it is not youth that sustains the future, but the wisdom that guides its steps. And never ever underestimate a woman in silence. Never underestimate a woman in silence. When I finished, the hall remained silent for a second that felt eternal. Then the first applause came, timid but intense. Then another. And another. Until the entire audience was on their feet, applauding. It wasn't applause for the return of an executive. It was a reverence for the courage of someone who refused to be forgotten. I descended from the stage with a peaceful heart. Jerry was waiting for me with a proud smile. Amber had tears in her eyes. Tyler, with his fists clenched in joy, said, "Now everyone knows." Sophia hugged me tightly, and at that moment, I understood that nothing had been in vain. The company, my family, my story, everything was where it should be. Not as before, but better. Because now, everything was chosen, conquered, deserved. I was no longer just Ava, the mother, the widow, the elderly woman. I was Ava Morgan, woman leader, and above all, presence. And there, before everyone, I knew that something greater had begun. It was the end of one cycle, and the beginning of another. The experience they imposed on me as a limitation, I transformed into a legacy. I created a mentorship program aimed at women over 60. Not to teach them, but to remind them of who they are. We started with a small, timid group, but eager for new beginnings. Each meeting was a reunion with their own worth. Different stories, similar pains, unique strengths that only maturity brings. They looked at each other with more courage after each conversation. They shared fears that society said were foolish, and discovered that, in fact, they were seeds. Seeds of new versions, new businesses, new voices. There, amidst laughter and memories, we were reborn together. And I, who so feared oblivion, found purpose in sharing. We received letters from other women across the country. They wanted to participate, they wanted to be seen, they wanted to be guided and heard. The structure grew, the program expanded to companies, communities, and universities. There was something powerful in seeing women who once diminished themselves now taking on positions, microphones, and making choices. And it all began with a silent decision. No longer accepting invisibility. Looking at each of those women was like looking at myself years ago. And in all of them I said in silence, "We are not finished. We are at another beginning." Tyler was the first to volunteer to support the program. He organized events, listened attentively, and recorded each story as if it were gold. When I suggested he become my direct assistant, his eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. "You have a lot to teach," he said. And I replied, "And you have a lot to continue." It wasn't flattery. It was earned. He accompanied me in meetings, reviewed documents by my side, helped me see with young eyes, and to him I offered the vision of time. We learned together, respecting the limits of each generation, without competition, just exchange. Tyler became a link between the past and the future of the company, and also a symbol of what happens when respect crosses ages. One afternoon after a mentoring presentation, he brought me a cup of tea. He sat with me on the terrace and said, "I think my generation is finally understanding." I smiled, because deep down that was my biggest goal. Not just to return but to open doors for others to understand the value of those who came before. Seeing Tyler grow professionally was more than pride. It was proof that well cared for seeds blossom and bear fruit. Now he learned from someone who truly knew. Little by little, the house became a home again. Dennis, more present, tried to redeem himself with silent gestures. It still wasn't easy, but it was genuine. The grandchildren listened to me with rare attention, laughed at my stories, and even asked for advice. Sophia, in turn, became more than a daughter. She was a partner, a companion in decisions, in silences, and in plans. Together we breathed freedom and respect. We walked through the company corridors as equals. I with the serenity of someone who has lived a lot. She with the energy of someone who still dreams twice as much. Being by her side was the greatest gift that time had given back to me. Our bonds didn't heal by magic but by daily choice, and that made them even stronger. On Sundays, we gathered everyone at the table. No tense dinners, no disguised contempt. Just honest conversations, genuine laughter, and the certainty that something had changed. Because I changed. Because everyone had to adjust to the woman who refused to disappear. My name, my story, my worth, they were all there alive, recognized. And that afternoon when I sat on the porch looking at my family around me, I thought, finally, I lived with dignity and no one would erase me again. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.